Sometimes life gets crazy and it's just too easy to focus on all the negativity in the world. Welcome to the audio antidote to that. On this show, we highlight the amazing and positive work being done in the world to remind ourselves that there is hope out there for the future. And along the way, we'll pick up some new perspectives and ideas so we can all work together to make the world a little bit better. Because we know that when creativity and community come together, we can create good. This is Creating Good with Matt Barnes. Let's do it. What's up there, friends? This is Creating Good with Matt Barnes. I'm your host, Matt Barnes, and we got another great episode for you here today. We are just, excited about people creating good in the world and telling those stories and being inspired by them. And that's what we're all about, is just getting people to realize that we can just use what we have to create good. And part of that is also a pledge that we have. We're asking people to take this pledge. It's at creatinggood.co/pledge. That's creatinggood.co/pledge, where you can just take a pledge to use what you have to create good in the world. The point of this podcast is to be inspired by people who are already doing that. And today we have an amazing guest with us. Her name is Nikki Stewart. She's the executive director of Old North Illuminated. They're an organization that not only preserves, but also breathes new life into historical narratives of Boston's Old North Church. This was really a fascinating interview for me. Nikki was really cool and gave me so much cool perspective and interest. What a way to create good by utilizing the past, the history that we have, to help inform the future and to help people realize that there is just so much we can do to create good in the world and to make sure that we're doing that going forward by looking backward. So she is at Boston's Old North Church, which is like a historical site, and she is the executive director of the foundation that manages that, and they do it's just really cool. I'll let her tell you about it. I'm not gonna waste your time with me telling you about it, just so you can hear her tell you about it much more effectively afterwards. All right, Nikki Stewart, thanks for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Now, Nikki, I was just telling you, you're the first person to tell me before we start recording that you're nervous about the 3 random questions. So
I'm ready, though. I'm ready.
Now I'm like wanting to really like mix them up a little bit and come up with some really challenging ones.
Well, no cheating.
Well, here's the weird thing. I'm looking at them, and one of them is not a random question. One of them was specifically for you, but the other 2 were random, and yet there is a theme between all 3 of them. So
Okay.
here we go. What is your favorite dessert?
My favorite dessert right now is tiramisu.
Oh, there you go. Is there a place that like makes the best tiramisu, or do you make it yourself?
Well, I work in the North End in Boston, which is an Italian neighborhood,
Okay.
so I can't say. I don't want to risk blowback. It's all delicious. Every place is good.
That's true. You don't want to get political here.
No, can't do that.
You can't do that. No. Don't want to risk anything. Okay. Second question. Milk, dark, or white chocolate?
Oh, dark, definitely.
Oh, you're one of those.
But I've gone full spectrum, because when I was younger, I only liked white chocolate, and then
That's
I've
interesting.
moved across the spectrum as I have aged. Yes.
Interesting. So was there a milk chocolate phase in the middle?
There was, and I can still enjoy a good milk chocolate.
Oh, that's
But
good.
if I was choosing from the 3, I would go for the dark.
Okay, good to know. I do not like dark chocolate. I like milk chocolate. I like white chocolate, though technically I don't think white chocolate is chocolate, from what I'm told.
Technically not, but
My kids though are like, no, they just won't even consider white chocolate.
oh,
I don't know why.
yeah.
All right. Last one. This question the team put in here for you because apparently you're known for being an award-winning apple pie baker.
That's true.
That's a thing? Okay.
I'm known because I tell people, yes. I'm my
That's
own
like-
PR team.
That's perfect. It's like I lead a referral roundtable group at our local chamber thing here sometimes, and I was put on there the best referral roundtable group. I said, I got together and voted, and we won. So that's how that was decided. All right, so you're known for that. How did you get into baking, and what parallels, if any, do you see between baking and your professional work? That's a deeper
Okay.
question, man.
It is. So first of all, I will say that I wouldn't consider myself into baking.
Okay.
But in this particular instance, I used actually my mother's apple pie recipe, which is a
Ah.
caramel apple pie.
Ooh.
So I'm not into baking, but I am very competitive. And so when I was given the opportunity to enter an apple pie baking contest, of course, I tested the recipe. I
Right.
made several for my colleagues. I was ready to win. And I was so ready to win that it was going to be devastating if I didn't because I had talked a big game. But fortunately, I did win the contest.
Okay.
Now, my husband, if he was here, would tell you that it's not really an apple pie, that it's really a cheesecake. However, in my defense, the judges believed that it was an apple pie and they believed that it was the best apple pie. So it's really their opinions that matter.
Well, yeah, they're the
Uh,
judges. If they thought it was okay, then it's okay.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. Nobody asked Jake what he thought.
Yeah.
But
There's a
the
reason for that, Jake. All right? Stay out of it.
but the reason that I don't really consider myself a baker is because I think that baking is very, like, precise and scientific. And so I like to cook because there's a lot of creativity there, and you can taste and you can fix it as you go along, or you can improve it as you go along. But I don't like having to follow a recipe so precisely to get as good
Mm,
of an outcome as you want when you're baking. So
yeah.
it's interesting to think about how that parallels in my professional life. Yeah, I don't know what that says.
That's okay. It was just a random question because that's what this is about. So, well, thank you for answering the 3 random questions. Did you how do you feel you did?
Good. I'm happy with my answers.
Okay,
Yes.
good. Excellent, excellent. All right. Tell us about you, your origin story. Where'd you come from, and what are you up to?
Well, I was born on a Sunday,
Okay.
and then we'll fast forward from there.
I was gonna say
So
this is gonna be a long one. All right, settle in.
so I am a Massachusetts transplant. I'm originally from Pennsylvania,
Okay.
but I've been in Boston for about 23 years now. And originally came here for school. And I went to Northeastern University that has a co op program. And so that's actually how I had an introduction to the nonprofit sector. My three co op internships were all at nonprofits. And so it really opened my eyes to even the existence of the sector, and the fact that fundraising is something that people do, and in fact something that I might be good at and that I could do as well. But then I kind of took a detour. I went to law school, but I graduated in 2009, which was, maybe one of the worst years ever
Hmm.
for graduates. Recessions, hiring freezes, all of
Yeah.
that stuff.
Yeah.
And so I did an AmeriCorps year, as a Vista with a youth arts organization called Zoomix, um, because I didn't want to just tread water. I'm like, I'm out. I got my degree. I'm ready to be a grown up in the world, and I want to get started.
Yeah.
And so took this Vista position as a grant writer. And the skills were very applicable. I was good at it, and I didn't have to stand up when anyone came into the room. So that was all very exciting, and that worked for me. And so
There you go.
that's really how I got into nonprofit work. Yeah.
Okay. So where now you're the executive director of Old North Illuminated. Tell us about that
Yes.
and what you're doing there.
Sure. So, Old North Illuminated is the nonprofit organization that manages research, education, interpretation, and preservation at Old North Church and Historic Site. Old North Church is a historic site in Boston's North End. It's part of our Freedom Trail, which a lot of folks
Okay.
have heard of, even if you're not in Boston.
Yeah.
And, it's most known for the 2 if by sea lantern signal on the night of Paul Revere's ride, although
Nice.
it is a 300-year-old historic site. I like to say we're more than a one night stand. We have 300 years of history.
Nice. Excellent. And what are you focused on there?
So, as the executive director, I am primarily focused on both implementing our strategic plan and kind of keeping us on track, getting us to where we want to go. Fundraising is
Yeah.
a huge piece of my job. We do not have a fundraising staff, so that is me, and the rest of the staff stepping in as needed. And then, there are fun things. I get to climb the steeple sometimes and take people up to, that famous spot. We have a historic crypt. I spend some time in
Ooh.
there sometimes. So, it's a fun and, it's a job that's really different from day to day.
Nice. Awesome. This is definitely a different type of a nonprofit organization than I think we've had on before. So what are some of the unique like challenges and opportunities that you face in what you're doing?
Yeah, well, I feel like it's an exciting time for public history,
Yeah.
if ever there was one. It's exciting for public historians, at least. I hope it's exciting for other people. But I feel like in recent years, there has within our field been really a growing movement to tackle what we might call hard history
Yeah.
and to kind of move past the mythology that
Hmm.
that surrounds a lot of historic sites. And I think Old North is a great example of that because most people, if you went to elementary school in America, you did hear about Paul Revere's ride and the
Sure.
lantern signals at some point. But you heard but a fraction of the story, and you probably either were mistaught or misremember, and you think that Paul Revere literally did everything himself.
He did.
Um,
He did. Don't tell me
yes.
otherwise. That's how it went. Thank
Well,
you
you
for
read it in
being
a
here
book, so
today. We're
it
gonna
must
go
be
now.
true. But, looking at Old North as an example, again, we're a 300-year-old historic site, representing lots of arcs in American history. And, the steeple where this lantern signal hang is looked to by a lot of people as a symbol of liberty and freedom and revolution.
Right.
And yet it is a steeple that was funded, largely in part with the proceeds of enslaved labor.
Mm.
And so we really, lean into that juxtaposition, and that's something that we want people to leave knowing and thinking about. But at the same time, outside of our field, we all know there's been increasing censorship of history in
Yeah.
terms of how it's taught, in terms of who can check out a book in a library. And so that's not as exciting for us.
Right.
So
That's
it's a little
that's kind of where
little bit
I
of a
when
weird time.
when you
We're
were like,
moving
"It's an
forward
exciting
and
time."
yeah.
I was like, "Really?" Because it feels like you're getting more, thrown at you than ever. It's exciting, and I agree in that, like, yeah, it's some people are starting to open up to those things, but I love the word you used, which was mythology, because I think, I don't know that people actively think of it as a mythology here in America, but it really is of the stories.
Mhm.
History is such a complicated subject, and yet we don't think of it that way, or we don't like to think of it that way. Maybe we think of it as simple. What I read on the page, that's what happened. Okay, great. And yet we can have now, the same event happen over the weekend with 5 video cameras on it and 1,000 people there, and yet hear different perspectives and different stories of what actually happened and we can't even agree on that, and yet we're supposed to be all like just yeah on the same page of what happened that night with Paul Revere 300 years ago or whatever. So what like how do you approach that? I mean, are you guys experiencing pushback at all, or as a historical, I don't know, I was going to use the word monument. I don't think monument's the right word. But organization,
Landmark. We're
landmark. There
a
you go.
historical landmark, a
As
national historic landmark, actually.
yeah, like do people kind of do you get the leeway to be able to do people come and want to hear the truth or the realistic side of things?
So there are two aspects of our programming that this applies to, and I think it hits a little differently with the two of them.
Hmm.
So we do our on-site interpretation as a historic site. We welcome about 200,000 visitors a year.
Wow.
And then we also do classroom curricula. And so in the most recent school year, we reached over 12,000 students in 44 states. And
Cool.
I just wanna tell you that the 6 states that are left are not necessarily the 6 that you would think.
Hmm.
So the reach has been good. Um, and we think about, the for our on-site programming, we really think about how visitors are going to respond, but really through the lens of what they're going to learn, not necessarily through the lens of what their emotional response might be.
Sure.
Um, and, we know that so many people come to us to really check us off a list, right? They're walking the Freedom Trail, they're doing all the sites in Boston National Historic Park or things like that. And they are here for that lantern.
Sure.
Absolutely. But there are things that we want everyone to leave understanding. We want people to understand that Old North does have ties to enslavement and colonialism.
Yeah.
And we want people to understand that slavery happened in the North in urban areas. And, the history of Old North Church is a good way to illustrate that.
Yeah.
And if you come to the church as a visitor, there are a lot of options for how you can explore the site. I mentioned that we have a historic crypt, right? So some folks just want to go in the crypt and get their Instagram photo, and
Sure.
and that's fantastic. you know, I've posted pictures from there on Instagram as
Sure.
well. And other folks will spend an hour, reading our permanent exhibit, doing our audio guide, talking to the staff. And so it really runs the gamut. And I will say that as we've rolled out new programming over the last 2 years now, we have been overwhelmingly surprised by how positive the response has been. And what we've learned is that if someone is going to have a negative response, it's going to happen very quickly. It's going to be a reaction that they have to, the first 5 minutes of the audio guide or the first few panels of the exhibit.
Hmm.
And we know this because people will say, "I can't believe you're not talking about Paul Revere." And then we'll know, "Oh, okay, so you didn't make it to the third panel. You
Yeah.
made it first, second." And so I think that's something that we actually anticipated
Mhm.
would be stronger pushback than we've had. Um, and I think for me personally, I will say it's seeing visitors interact with the exhibits and hearing their questions, and it makes me challenge my own assumptions
Mhm.
about, how I might profile someone and how I might assume they're going to react. And so that's been, a little bit of growth for me and I think for some of the other staff as well. But
Sure.
with our classroom programming, because we're trying to reach schools in all 50 states, we have had a lot of conversations about what, if any, obligation we have to, comply with the harsh
Right.
realities that teachers are working in. And I remember within the last year bringing this topic to our education committee and saying, for example, if a school is on a field trip from a state where it might be problematic for that teacher if we're talking about slavery, should we offer, a light version of our experience? And the committee, which is they're a great group, but they're a
Yeah.
very mild-mannered group of mostly academics. Man, it fired them up.
I
And they
bet. I
said,
was gonna say.
"Absolutely not."
I was
We are holding the line.
well, it's interesting. My first career was education, and so I'm it's something I'm passionate about. I did a master's in education. I love the educational process. I also am very well aware of how broken our educational system is in a lot of ways. And so like you and like you were saying about them is when you said that it before you got to what their response was of watering it down or a light version, I instantly was like, I'm instantly like, oh, you can't do because it is what it is.
Yeah.
It's the facts are the facts. And but I wonder because I think I run into this with so many with well, really with anything, but especially with nonprofits, how much of it is how you say what you say instead of what you're saying. And I would imagine that if you were to in your exhibits, and I haven't seen them, so I don't know, and you can correct me if I'm imagining it's not everything you were taught was wrong. And let me, where you're instantly having people put up their defenses. But if you're just like, if panel one is, if you're just doing the history and this is what happened, and then this is what happened, and then Paul Revere, and then you're just like, oh, I'm just learning history, and I didn't know all this stuff. I just knew panel three before, and I didn't know the context of all of that. And I would imagine, you're still gonna get some people, but you're gonna get people who are a little more open if you're just presenting it instead of
Yeah.
like, "Oh, I'm trying to convince you," or "I'm trying to change your mind about this," or that kinda thing.
Mhm.
Is that accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. And, we had the benefit of some research that we were able to see that had been, I think it was done by Colonial Williamsburg. Um, that was a survey to kind of get to how you present new or different information. And, at Old North, we were fortunate to have a research fellow with us from 2022 to 2023. And that gave us the opportunity to explain, well, the reason we have new programming is because we have new information and we have new research. And so even that frames it as we're not changing what we told you before. Everything we told you before is largely still true and good information.
Right.
We have new information now.
Yes. And it may change some aspects, but most of the time that new information is giving more context for the whole for the situation. I mean, whether in your case or just in general, that's generally most of the time that's when we're learning and we're growing, we're getting new context for things, and it may cause us to see some of the facts that we knew before differently, but
Yeah.
it's not necessarily changing those facts.
Yeah. For me personally, it's a little challenging because, like my writing is forged from years of grant writing,
Yeah.
and before that, law school. In both of those contexts, you are bringing people to a conclusion and
Yes.
and really hammering them with it at the end. Not guilty,
Right. Right. Right.
or give me the money.
Right.
And
Right.
so I can also appreciate that when we're, presenting public history, whether in an exhibit or a lecture or whatnot, that people don't like to be given the conclusion. People
Mm.
like to be able to get there themselves. And so we have to give people the information to have a conversation or, to think a little deeper. But we can't take them all the way to the finish line. I think a lot of folks don't appreciate that. And I can understand that.
Yeah, it's such an interesting thing because history is like you said, you're giving them the information. There are definitely lessons to be drawn from those things. But is it more effective to present them all, just present the information and allow people to draw their own conclusions? Right now, I'm listening to a podcast called Ultra that I don't know if you've heard of, but it's really interesting looking back at the 30s and 40s and some of the things that were happening in society that honestly really mirror a lot of things that are happening right now, and that but somehow I was never taught. You never heard of these things, or you've heard bits, but not, wow, this was a whole huge thing. And, but it is interesting because, while there's always perspective in presentation, um, there aren't, I think it's done smartly in that there's not ever direct correlations made between that happened then and now it's happening again. It's more like, wow, they'll play a recording from a radio show from 1938 or something, and I'm like, oh, I just heard that exact phrase last week somebody else made that or whatever it might be, and I think that's more effective in a lot of ways.
Mhm. Mhm.
You know,
Yep. We're doing a play. Actually, last summer we um, worked with a company called Plays and Place to produce an original play at the church. And it's back for a second run this year. But it takes place on the afternoon of the night of the lantern signals. So, really, just a few hours before. And the three characters are all fathers, but from very different walks of life. So, we
mm,
have the minister of the church or the rector. We have one of the men who we believe held the lantern signals, and then there is an enslaved man named Cato who was enslaved by the rector.
Hmm.
And it's really a conversation between 3 fathers who know that war is coming, right? Like, the future is looking bleak at this
Yeah,
point. And they have to make decisions about what is best for them and their families, but they have very, differing perspectives based on their professions. They have different information, some of it's correct and some of it's not.
sure.
And they have to figure out, what's happening next. And, I don't have to conclude that play by saying, "And now in 2024, we face uncertainty." No,
Right, right,
people they can get
right.
there on their own. Yes.
But I wonder if that isn't part of the key to some bigger issues, even, like, in society, but also with nonprofits where, when we're doing the educating and the storytelling and the things that we do to bring about awareness of things, allowing people, because one of the biggest criticisms that I personally make and hear, of society and everything is there's such a lack of critical thinking and critical thought that's happening. People are just accepting what they're being told in a lot of situations. And I'm wondering, like, if the key to that is not presenting the conclusions and giving people the information so that they have to synthesize it themselves and figure out, wait a minute, what does that mean? What do I do with this? Instead of being told, here's what you do with this. This is what this means. We've entered this time period where we're just constantly bombarded with everyone's opinions on what this means and what this does and what that is. So you don't have to think.
No.
Yeah.
And somehow they all get weighted equally, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, we
Yeah.
saw it during the pandemic. We say all the time, and it's such a frustrating thing when you're going like, wait, you're just accepting what you're being like, stop and consider sources and do
Mhm.
research and all of that. But also, take out the opinion part of what people. The news has become more opinion than fact,
Mhm.
and so you're not left to draw any conclusions. Your conclusions are given to you.
Yeah. I mean, and I think the play is also a good example of that because when we learned American history in school, I think generally we learned a narrative of patriots good, loyalists bad.
Yeah.
Um, and and I think most people, if not all, leave that elementary school classroom firmly believing that they would
Mm.
have been a patriot.
Right.
And
Right.
so people come to Old North, known for this lantern signal and think that it was a patriot congregation, and it really wasn't.
Hmm.
It's a Church of England church at that time.
Oh,
So
interesting.
inherently loyalist. Everybody was a loyalist until they weren't. And so I also hope our visitors leave just understanding that it's a little more nuanced than that.
Yeah.
That, if you're anti-violence, like you might have been a loyalist because that was the safe way to go,
Mm.
right? Or if your business was being impacted by taxes and problems importing, then you might have been a patriot. It
Right.
could be as simple as what was your profession.
Interesting.
And so I think it helps people hopefully realize that, today your income and your profession or your religion or your cultural upbringing, all of that influences how you read things and how you see the current situation.
Well, even I was mentioning that podcast, the mythology version of World War II and all, what we're taught in very simplistic terms. And then you find out, oh no, this was much more complicated. It
Mhm.
was not, the US was united against, there were a lot of people here that were going like, well, maybe Nazism's a way to go. I mean, it was a very, there was a lot more complications than the way we look at it in history's rearview mirror of, yeah, the lines were clear cut. We took a side, we won, that was that. Move on.
Yeah, yeah.
Nazis bad, Hitler bad.
Still
Um,
bad.
yeah,
Still bad.
still
Yes.
definitely bad. But also it was not everybody said that at the time. And I that's where you're like, whoa, oh yeah, it was never taught that. There was maybe resistance to the United States going into the war. There was, all these kind of things. And now so I'm thinking now of like 40 years from now when my kids are older and they have kids in school, how are they going to be taught about what's happening right now? Like, what's the simplistic version of this
Mhm.
that's going to come out of it? And how do we, I don't know, prep people for making sure that the lessons are actually there to be learned and grasped. I don't know.
Yeah.
I and these are probably bigger topics and conversations than this podcast is known for. But but I do think, like when I'm working with nonprofits, it's because so many of the topics that nonprofits are tackling have been heavily politicized. Figuring out the language and how we bring people in and getting them to think beyond just the talking points of their party or of the news, is a challenge.
Yeah, and I think it's hard to really think about what, what pieces of the nonprofit sector haven't been politicized at this point.
Right.
Everything is politicized. I mean,
Exactly.
rescuing animals, I think we're all still united on that one, but, in most cases, it is, and we've really had to wrestle internally with what it means to simply, follow our values as an
Right.
organization, right? Like we have values as people, but also as an organization. Um, but does that become political? Is it and I think we believe, well, we can be political, we just can't be partisan.
Right.
And so, that's a Venn diagram right there that's very
Mhm.
tricky to think about how to navigate.
Yeah.
And I think, some nonprofits, depending on their mission and their issue area, probably have a donor base and a constituency that is much more aligned than ours is at Old North.
Sure.
We really are welcoming visitors from all the way across the spectrum.
Yeah.
And we want to be hospitable and to give them all a good time and to have an impact on all of them. And similarly, our donors come from pretty far across the spectrum.
Hmm.
And so, I've been in situations where I've thought to myself, like, should I send this donor the annual report?
Right.
I'm not sure that they're gonna like it. I don't know that I want them to know about our new programming, and that's tough. That's
Yeah.
tough to wrestle with.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a I mean, we keep saying things like, it's such a crazy time. It's such a but realistically, we've been here before, and we're gonna be here probably again, unfortunately. And it's always an interesting time to figure out how to navigate the whatever current things are, But one of I did another podcast earlier today, and we were talking about, with nonprofits, just the history of nonprofits asking for money and all, because right now in America, the amount people are donating is down, or the amount of people who
Yeah.
are donating is down. The amount actually being given by larger donors is up, but the average person is giving less or not at all. And we were, I was wondering if, maybe is part of that, like, man, we've been hearing these messages for years and years and years from the nonprofits of, oh, we're trying to solve this and we're trying to solve that. And then you're going like, yeah, but you've been asking me for that for 30 years. You still haven't solved it. Why am I going to keep giving money to this thing that, like, it just seems like it keeps going? It's a perpetual problem. And and is there sort of a hope lost there in that, like, um, maybe our messaging needs to be a little bit different, and the
Mhm.
way we tell stories needs to be a little bit more engaging and showing people how they can be a part of solutions.
Yeah, and I mean, I think some of that just gets to, like, the myth of nonprofit sustainability, right?
Right.
Because you always have to answer that question in the grant proposal of, like, "How is this program sustainable?" And then you just wanna say, "Well, it's not.
Right.
It's funded by philanthropy. Yeah, I'm gonna need you to chip in next year too."
Yeah.
Like, I actually have no plan for
Yeah.
sustainability.
That's why I hate grant proposals. I'm always like, man, these are written by people who so often just don't understand how nonprofits actually work. You're like, oh man. And then everybody's trying to bend over backwards to meet the criteria instead of saying, no, this is what we do, and do you want to support it?
Yeah, and then shoot, what did I say last year?
Exactly. Exactly. Is most of the funding for what you're doing for Old North Illuminated public, or is it government or private or?
So actually, about 75% of our operating revenue is through earned income. Because we do charge admission for the site. It's a
Okay.
$5 admission fee. We have gift shops and things like that.
Sure.
So that is, obviously wonderful. And I'm sure a lot of people listening right now are thinking, man, that sounds great. And I'm not gonna lie, it is pretty good.
Yeah.
But of the 25% that we do fundraise each year, that's primarily for what I would call like icing and new programming, because I do think funders look at our model and say, well, you are basically a business, right? You're
Yeah.
charging revenue. A lot of what you do should pay for itself.
Yeah.
And so, we use philanthropy first and foremost to support our classroom programming because we offer that free to teachers.
Yeah.
And there is no sustainability there. We served over 12,000 students this year. If we start charging for that programming, it might be 500 next
Right.
year.
Right.
Teachers and schools can't pay for it.
No.
Um, and then, well, the cost of maintaining a 300-year-old building is a whole other podcast that
Oh
I'm not
yeah, I
even
bet.
going to get into.
I
Let's not
bet.
touch it.
Yeah. But it's I you know what? But it's it's to your credit that your organization has, instead of just maintaining a building and offering tours and whatnot, that you're using your opportunity to educate and to have new programs and bring about awareness and all of that. That's because it could easily be, hey, we're a historic landmark and we offer tours and a gift shop, and that pays for our upkeep and our salaries and whatever, and that's it you know but to take on something beyond that is and give it more of a purpose than just a tourist destination
Yeah, yeah.
is impressive. And so congratulations to you guys on that.
Thank
um
you.
I mean, like when you said you were offering curriculum for students in classroom stuff, I immediately assumed, oh, like in the local Boston area. But then when you said you're in all but, what was it, all but 6 states?
All but 6 states and Vermont. Come on, Vermont. We're looking for you next.
You would think Vermont would be on board with this.
That's
Come
what I'm
on.
saying. It's not what you'd think. It's not them, it's us. We just haven't found the
Mm.
right channel yet.
Are you in California? Are you out here?
Yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
good, good, good.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing, because it is a different perspective than most of the nonprofits that come on here, but it is interesting how in different ways we're all facing the same issues, and just finding creative solutions for making the world a better place. That's what
Absolutely.
it's really all about.
Yeah.
It's awesome. Okay, a few closing questions for you.
Okay.
Is there someone in the nonprofit world that you really admire that you would most want to take to lunch and pick their brain?
Ugh. I mean, I think I would have to say Cecile Richards.
Oh, I don't know who that
Um,
person is.
she's the former, national executive director of Planned Parenthood.
Oh, okay.
Um, and I mean, talk about a subject matter that's politicized,
Oh,
right?
yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And an organization that's like just trying to give basic health care,
Yeah,
and that's somehow become politicized and partisan. Um, I think there's a lot to learn there about how she navigated that.
yeah, for sure. Wow. And then what is the part of your job that brings you the most joy?
I enjoy watching people come into the church, um, and just seeing their reaction as they take it in.
Yeah,
Because for so many people, it is a meaningful experience to see this piece of history. And I often will see, grandparents coming in and bringing their grandchildren for the
yeah,
first time. The first time doing the Freedom Trail with grandma and grandpa.
yeah,
And that's just incredible. And we have all of these lofty aspirations, right, about how we're going to educate people about history and change the world, but also we're giving families really happy memories, and I think that's super special too.
absolutely. That's awesome. That's really great. All right, how can people find out more about Old North Illuminated and connect with you?
Yeah, so our website is oldnorth.com, and, obviously, people can come find us in
Yeah.
Boston, but I will say there are a ton of resources on the website, including, a virtual reality tour that was
Ooh,
produced by UMass Boston.
very
So,
cool.
for the history lovers that are listening, you can virtually climb the steeple yourself from the comfort of your couch, which is awesome. And we also have an Illuminating the Unseen web series, which explores Black and Indigenous history at Old North. And that's completely free and available on the website as well.
Very cool. Nikki, thank you so much for being here. This
Oh,
is
thank you.
really interesting, and I've really enjoyed learning more about what you're doing and meeting you.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Creating Good with Matt Barnes is recorded at Rogue Collective in beautiful Newport Beach, California. It's hosted and executive produced by me, Matt Barnes. Post-production is by our amazing friends over at Fame, the B2B podcast agency. Writing is by Matt Barnes and Taylor Bolanos from Rogue Creatives. Creative direction and design is overseen by Corey Hill of Rogue Creatives. Theme music is composed and performed by Jared Atherton of Chapters. Huge thanks to our amazing guests for joining us this episode, and thank you to all of you incredible listeners for tuning in. If you enjoyed the show, and I would imagine you did if you're still listening, so don't forget to help us spread some good by giving us a good review. Preferably like 5 stars, lots of really nice words. It's very helpful. Also, tell your friends and subscribe so we can come straight into your potholes each and every time we have a new episode. Take the Creating Good pledge on our website at creatinggood.co. We'll catch you next time. This has been a Rogue Creatives production.